Welcome to the P&A Thought Leadership Forum. This is the second portion, and we will be having Zack Nippert, the Chief Commercial Officer of Civic Science, will be reporting about trust in the media in 2020. So the webinar will begin with Zack's presentation. We'll then open up for a question and answer session, and we will include questions that we receive in the chat, and we encourage you to put those in the chat. It's located up in the upper right side of your GoToMeeting window with the chat bubble icon. So I will pass it over to Zack to present.
Thanks, Mary. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zack Nippert, as Mary said. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Civic Science. I hate being the one who stands between people and lunch, so I'll keep this short but informative at the same time. I'm really excited to be here today with all of you, even if it's virtual. You've given me a reason to put on a sport coat again. I never thought I would say this, but I really wish I was in a hotel conference room presenting right now with unlimited coffee and a microphone in my hand. I've spent my career working in advertising, media, market intelligence, mostly in Chicago and New York City. I'm currently in Chicago right now. I'm a recovering ad guy. I've done a lot of presentations and keynotes over my career, but I've never presented to a news media association. So this should be fun, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about our mission at Civic Science. We're on a mission to provide our clients with the highest quality data so they can make the best decisions and investments to grow their organizations. Our clients put their trust in us because we believe that the world has never been in a greater need of a trusted, objective source of truth. And like the trusted media, that's what we strive to deliver every day for our clients. So who is Civic Science? We're located in downtown Pittsburgh. We were born out of CMU about 10 years ago and have pioneered a new method of always-on quantitative online research that can capture representative samples all day, every day. We offer a state-of-the-art enterprise platform for our clients for understanding every element of the modern consumer. I'm going to be showing you a lot of data in the next 20 to 30 minutes, so I want to level set with everybody on how we gather the data and analyze it, and I'm going to do this in a non-salesy way. However, if I break that promise, just unmute me and start booing, and I won't be offended. So, when it comes to our data, we source it through partnerships with hundreds of top online and mobile content publishers, also known to people as websites. Websites you've probably heard of, things like BuzzFeed, MSN, Vox, Slate, and hundreds of others. Our quizzes and polls are non-intrusively embedded in a website's content experience and set up so people want to engage with them. The first question that people typically see is an engagement question that has to do with something that's either culturally relevant, it has to do with the website theme specifically, or maybe even the article. We're currently collecting about 4 million responses per day, and as of a few days ago have over 120 million profiles in our database of people that have interacted with our widget on these websites over the last several years. Our data is reliable and organic because our polls are 100% voluntary, and respondents are kept anonymous even to us. So we're completely a first-party data, solution, and we are data compliant with all of the new data privacy laws. And then lastly, we store all of these people's answers over time in an anonymous profile. We use our proprietary advanced technology and platform to analyze that data in aggregate in near real time. We can do unlimited cross-tabulations of all of these always-on questions against these millions of profiles that we have, and we help our clients find statistically meaningful correlations so that they can navigate the consumer mindset at scale and then act upon those opportunities accordingly for their businesses. So that's a little bit about who we are and how we do it. As I was creating this presentation, I thought about my 2 young daughters, if you guys were listening to Mary and I before we were talking about Halloween, and how my wife and I try to protect them from the news, but still they pick up on it. when we listen to Alexa's news updates or turn the TV on for a few minutes to see what's going on. For those parents out there, you know this. You don't think they're listening, but they always are. My 4-year-old recently asked me why Biden is sleepy and Trump is angry. My wife gave me that look of no more news on the TV when the kids are around, at least for now. I then thought about my own childhood, watching my grandpa read the newspaper every morning. Man, he would get angry when the guy missed the driveway and hit the roof or the tree. I had to go help him get that newspaper down. Outside of the bad relationship that my grandpa had with the paper boy, he enjoyed reading the news every day, and I aspired to be like him one day. But for now, you know, he would pass me the comics to read, and I was happy. Now he doesn't care so much for the news. He mutes the commercials. I tell him that defeats the purpose of the industry that I used to be in, but he still misses the newspapers. He says, according to him, it's just not the same as it used to be. So, you know, the takeaway for me is that consuming the news used to be relaxing, enjoyable, and easy. Something you could start your morning coffee off to, like my grandpa or this random couple here that I have. Nowadays, consuming the constant news cycle can feel like we're going into battle for the media and the American people. And whether we like it or not, it's everywhere. Newspapers, TV, social media, iPhone notifications, even Alexa has something to say about it. We're overwhelmed and overstimulated as a society, and we can feel it, especially during COVID. And it's not just news, it's always breaking news. The smallest things can be breaking news. Thank God for memes here, can help me with my presentation humor. And for the last 4 years, we've had to think harder than normal about whether the news we are consuming is fake news. We recently did a study among US adults trying to understand, when sharing an article on social media, if they typically read the whole article first. 73% thankfully said yes, but 22% said sometimes. Where it gets interesting is when we ask them, when your friends share articles on social media, do you think they typically read the whole article first? Only 11% said yes, 51% said sometimes. I guess we have some untrusting friends these days. Those friends are basically saying, I don't believe you. Now, how could I not include Mr. Ron Burgundy in my first news media presentation? This is where it's hard to read the virtual room, and I wish I was on stage in that conference room in the hotel. I hope at least one of you laughed and no one is offended. So if you think that's surprising, that your friends don't trust that you read the articles you share, you might find this even more surprising. We did another study recently asking the main driver of why people still pay for live TV. I was even surprised by this. Civic Science data shows that 68% of Americans surveyed still pay for some sort of live television programming in one way or another. But why? It's the news. Yes, the news. We all know prior to the pandemic, the answer was always sports, right? Never the news, it was sports. However, these days, it's the news. We might not trust it, but we need it and we're willing to pay for it. 30% of Americans who pay for live television say the main reason they do so is for local and or cable news. Watching other programming as it airs and live sports events are neck and neck, as you can see here, for the runner-up, 23 and 22% of respondents answering these respectfully. So trust, that's what we're here to talk about today. We all know about trust. We know that trust is hard to build and can be lost in a second. I do have some good news though. Over the past 3 years, Civic Science has been tracking a steady decrease in the number of adults saying they don't trust any news source. In fact, trust in the news to deliver unbiased reporting is at its highest level since 2017. You could say that a global crisis leading up to a presidential election might force folks to pick somewhere and someone they trust to stay up to date And that's really kind of what we believe is happening. It's really the only thing that explains this from what we're seeing in our data. The real question is, will it last? As you see here, since 2009, the percentage of Americans who say they don't trust any news source to be unbiased dropped 10 percentage points. As of 2020, broadcast news is the most trusted news source among American adults at 18%, followed by cable news networks at 14% and local news at 13%. In 2018, local news was the most trusted. Mostly what this data indicates is the steady rise in trust occurring before the pandemic or onset of political advertising that we've been dosed with over the last 3 to 6 months. If we were to filter out those who reported not trusting any news source to deliver unbiased news, it appears adults nationwide trust broadcast news the most. In 2017, broadcast news was only slightly ahead of local TV news before dropping below both local and cable news networks in 2018. So after some ups and downs, it came out on top and appears to still be increasing as of today. Surprisingly, every age group dropped by about 10 percentage points since last year. So what we're seeing is that age really isn't a big factor. It's likely the pandemic has made most people more trusting of the news as a whole because it is the place to go to learn about the latest news around COVID cases in your area and across the country. And of course, everyone is interested in the run up to the election and now on the edge of their seats trying to figure out what's going to happen next and who the next president is going to be. Another thing that we see is younger Americans, men, are more likely to be untrusting of the news than their counterparts. So men distrust the news to deliver facts without a slant much more than women, and women are slightly more trusting of cable news networks than men are. And when it comes to age groups, Americans aged 18 to 24 are more likely to be trusting of digital-only media to deliver unbiased reporting than their counterparts. But at the same time, they are the most untrusting of the media overall. Older Americans, 55 plus, not calling anyone old, seem to generate a significant amount of broadcast news popularity. As we just said, it's going up across the board. A quarter of the over 55 crowd say they put their faith in broadcast news more than any other news source today. And where you live also matters how much you trust the news. City folks report being the least trusting of news sources for information. If they do trust news sources, it's likely to be broadcast media, followed by cable news. So you see a trend here. County dwellers or country dwellers, suburban and rural, share similar sentiments towards news sources. So you can see, although people in the suburbs lean on broadcast news more than both city and rural inhabitants. And that's kind of surprising. But as you see here in kind of the pink shade across the board, 47, 37, and 39%, we still have a lot of work to do to earn the trust back of people. But broadcast news and cable news networks across the board are still delivering that news, that trusted news to many. Everything in the middle, it looks like, still needs some work. So trusted news sources impacts impressions of the pandemic, I'm sure is not surprising. And based on the data collected in our study, one could say that trusting any news source correlates with a rising concern about the pandemic. People skeptical of reporting from all news sources indicate the smallest increase of concern about the coronavirus in the past few weeks. The more people trust broadcast and cable news, the more people are concerned about COVID-19. Those who trust social media the most, as well as those who trust any news source, are the least concerned about the coronavirus pandemic in the recent weeks. With it raging, as we all know that it is right now, we find this surprising. And as we know, COVID-19 has impacted the job market. And those who are working remotely as a result of the pandemic are less trusting of news at large than any others. Likely an income proxy is what we're seeing. The impact of the pandemic on job status reveals a curious imbalance in the trust among workers diversely affected by its spread. It goes without saying that those who have lost their job or had had their hours or pay cut as a result of the pandemic find themselves in a position at no fault of their own. The impact of the pandemic has been widespread and difficult to contain, yet people whose jobs haven't been affected, other than a shift to remote work like most of us, report significantly less trust in news sources than those who are working reduced hours or pay or aren't working at all. The wealthy, however, are less trusting of the news sources than any other income bracket. If at first glance this seems extremely odd, consider this. Wealthy Americans and those in certain kinds of jobs are less likely to suffer from salary or job loss due to the pandemic. Wealthy Americans, which we kind of look at here as $100,000 or more each year, report the most distrust in news reporting across the board. Adults who make $100,000 or more annually over-index reporting, again, that they don't trust the news to deliver those unbiased facts that they hope that they would see. And people in lower income brackets, $50,000 or less here, are more likely than their counterparts to trust the local TV news. Again, as we've seen in previous slides, broadcast news, cable news are the most trusted. And overall, in pink, we still see a lot of distrust, but hopefully we're starting to chip away at that, and that's what our data is suggesting. So trust and frequency, probably not surprising, go hand in hand. Heavy news watchers are more likely to be trusting of the news and over-index in placing the most trust in broadcast news to deliver unbiased content. Those who never consume the news don't trust it by almost double. And of course, how could we not talk about politics? As much as I don't want to include any politics in a presentation, I'd be foolish not to at least acknowledge that it is something that we are all dealing with this year and right now. It always comes into play. And given there were major shifts in trust that occurred after the 2016 general election, we took a quick look at the influence of political leanings. Is anyone surprised here? Probably not. Republicans are the least trusting of any news source, followed by independents, and Democrats are much more trusting of broadcast news than the general population, 26% versus 18%. So where do people go first for breaking news, the real breaking news? While broadcast and cable news are most trusted to deliver unbiased news overall, as we've seen, Americans self-report that they go to national news websites and local TV for first breaking news. Among the general population who consider breaking news important, as you'll see, 22% will check out a national news website, followed slightly below that, 21% a local news channel, and then below that at 18% a national news channel and 18% at a cable news channel. However, national news and cable channels are right behind them. So, though local TV lost its 2018 spot of being the most trusted source for breaking news, it's not all bad news for local television. In fact, 1/3 of adults report watching local TV every day, with 50% of people saying they watch every day or on most days. And daily local TV viewers are watching it a lot per day. Those who watch every day, this is shocking to me too, 53% report consuming 5 hours or more of the news. And those who consume most days, 65% watch 1 to 5 hours of news today. That's not too surprising to me. But 53% consuming 5+ hours is. Lastly, and surprisingly, the amount of weekly news programming Americans watch has remained pretty stable since January. This is obviously the beginning of the pandemic, and as we've tracked it from Q2 up until a few days ago, we have seen that not much has shifted. It'll be interesting to see how that goes in the future. And now that I've said all of that, I can't promise any of this is going to stay this way. I was actually wish I was giving this presentation months from now when we're out of a contested election and hopefully in the final innings of a pandemic. The good news, we're going to continue covering this topic over the next several quarters. So if you're interested, we have a great latest insights page on our website. We push out a lot of publications and data every single day across various topics, this being one of them. So stay tuned, as they say in the news business. And that's it. You can now eat lunch, but before we do, I'll take any questions you guys have.
All right, Zach, we do have a question. It's, what can local community newspapers do to earn the trust of readers?
One of the things that I didn't put in here as a data point, because the question was owned by one of our clients that I would have loved to put in here, is that people stated by a large margin that they would trust news overall more, especially broadcast news, but I think it implies the local news, that if facts were checked and stated that those facts were checked and kind of how they were checked. And I think as we live in this age of disinformation and overall consumption, I mean, you can read one article that says one thing and the other article that says completely different thing. And as we all know, we can Google anything these days, and we can Google whatever answer we want to hear. But the number one thing our data is showing, in something we've been tracking over the last 2 years and increasingly growing, is that stating the facts and how you got to those facts is the number one way of increasing trust.
Thank you, Zach. And which news source do you think has the largest uphill battle when it comes to trust?
I actually think it's one that's not on this presentation. I guess it kind of is in the beginning of my presentation, and that's social media. I think the sharing of information, what we've seen over the last several weeks to months with censorship on Twitter and Facebook, and the concerns that people have about big tech and Google and everybody, is making people very skeptical in terms of what they read on social networks. And it's my own personal prediction, but I think people are going to continue to stay in touch with the news, especially as we go through this pandemic. I think sports will return as the reason that people pay for TV, but I think people are going to go right to the source, and they're going to be less believing in social media unless something big changes across the social media and technology landscape. Because I know there's a lot of really frustrated people out there right now, feeling that their voices is being censored and what they share is being censored.
Thank you. All right, and along the lines of what your answer was for the first question, additional question is, since newspapers do fact check, should they include more language about that within their stories? And if so, what sources does Civic Science view as the most credible for fact checking?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think that is going to be increasingly important, and I don't know how it's going to be done. What kind of, whether it's going to be done at a more corporate level of, saying that X local news brand has a process for fact checking and a methodology for it from an overarching fashion, so that when you read any article, you believe it to be true and have trusted the facts because it's run through a gauntlet of things before it hits the newspaper or the TV. I think people, what we see is that some people trust Pew Research. Those people typically over-index in higher income brackets. Other people just feel comforted in knowing that something has been fact checked. They may be less familiar with the source, but just the fact that it's been done and it's acknowledged that it's been done it makes them feel better. So I don't know that necessarily the source is the answer, and it's a great question, and one that makes me kind of want to launch a question on in our database about it, and I think I will actually. So again, stay tuned. But it would be interesting to find what fact-checking sources that people find the most helpful and trusting.
Okay. And one last question, I think. How does your research compare to other quantitative research methods?
Yeah, so again, our methodology for collecting this data is pretty unique in that we develop these relationships with publishers and collect the data where we're not paying respondents for it. We're engaging them, we're rewarding them with fun little facts. So if you answer a question, it says you're more likely to like Burger King over McDonald's, and they like kind of seeing those little facts. But then there's this level of curiosity and narcissism that comes into play after people answer 4 questions, which is the typical amount of questions we ask in a question series. People get to see how they stack up against all the other people that have answered those questions. That's where the curiosity and the narcissism comes in a little bit. We're constantly gathering data. Like I said, we're anywhere from 4 to 5 million responses per day. And we've got people engaging with this, and we're always growing our database across the country, locally, regionally, nationally, and we can always go find more data and more people to answer things. Where a lot of quantitative research comes into play, it's either small sample sizes or it's a panel. So you're always filtering things down and then hoping, that those respondents, who we kind of coin as professional survey takers, they're paid to do so, they do it a lot, are representative of the sample of how the country feels. So we think we're very uniquely positioned because we're not paying people, we're not pulling people out of a panel or anything else. We're getting how they feel in the moment, and we're able to track that every day over time against our clients' questions and against cultural topics like the trust in the media.
Okay, I actually did just receive another question. So based on political leanings, more Democrats than Republicans trusting news, what is Civic Science's view on building stories that appeal more to those who trust newspaper news versus trying to engage those who may not be as engageable?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
So based on what you were saying about more Democratic leaning folks as opposed to Republicans trusting news,
Yes.
would it be more, what would be the best way for a newspaper to handle that? Would it be easier to catch that low-hanging fruit of the Democratic mindset, or to try to flip and engage one that is less likely?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's, we're all trying to get eyeballs. We're all trying to stay afloat and get those ad dollars, and we want to keep our advertisers happy, but we need to keep our readers happy, because without readers, we don't have any, advertising dollars to gain. I do think unbiased, is always the best stance to gain the trust. At Civic Science, we really don't engage with political questions, even though we're a polling company, and thank goodness we don't, because if you see the news, it says polling, the latest polling people need to find new jobs. So I'm grateful that our CEO and our company decides to not get involved with politics for that reason. But I'd say if we did, we would even have an unbiased bent to it, and making sure that we're stating the facts and really trying to look at it from both angles. So I think unbiased is always the best key, but it's gonna differ from city to city, state to state, in terms of whether you live in a Republican or a Democrat city or state. And I think, again, stating the facts, sharing the news, and not just sharing the bad news, but sharing the good news. I think, as we've seen through the pandemic, good news is some of the most clicked on stuff because people just want a relief. And good news can be unbiased too.
Okay, thank you. And we actually got another question. You're very popular topic. So this question is, does the data that you're seeing show a shift in views about news between rural and urban news consumers, and also by geography, northern versus southern states, East Coast versus West?
Yeah, we have not looked we have not double clicked into to look at things from a geography standpoint. Mary, if you want to send me whoever asked that question, or I'd be happy to follow up with the whole group. I'd be happy to run that analysis to get that answer
Sure.
after. But just to be honest with everybody, I have not double clicked into looking at things from a geography standpoint. And what was the other part of the question?
Rural versus urban, if there's a shift in that amount of trust.
Yeah, I'm just trying to go back to the slide I had up here. Yeah, so as we see here, I can follow up by trending this because we have 3 months of data collected against this question. But as you see that where, and what I said earlier is where you live also matters how much you trust the news. So if you're in the suburbs or rural, you do trust broadcast and.
I think you have a different screen up for us.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
There you go.
Okay. Cable news the most and have the least amount of distrust versus people living in cities seem to trust cable news networks, or sorry, broadcast networks the most, but less than the suburbs, and are the most untrusting of all media sources if you live in a city versus suburbs.
Okay.
Again, I'd be happy to take a shot at trending this. However, over 3 months, I don't think we're gonna see too many dynamic shifts. But again, we're tracking this, so stay tuned.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Zach. Do you have anything else you'd like to say, or?
No, thank you. This has been fun. I enjoyed all the questions, and hopefully I get to do this again next year. And we're drinking that unlimited burnt coffee in a conference room somewhere nice and warm. And hope everybody stays safe and stays well and enjoy the holidays.
Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us, taking the time and presenting all of this great information. And thank you all for attending today.